Happy Friday, everybody. I'm Jade Scott. This is GrowthRx, and we are live today with Brett Weiner. Brett Weiner is an osteopath, a business owner at the Sports and Spinal Group, and he's also very, very interested and an avid ambassador for practitioner wellness and basically just clinician care. Caring for the clinician is one of the things that Brett is most known for, particularly at Osteopathy Australia, which has been an amazingly successful platform that has helped, I guess, address some of the issues that we deal with as clinicians when it comes to burnout, grounding ourselves, dealing with just the emotional load that we get with practitioners. But it's going to extend a lot more on that today, because in particular, we're going to be talking about positive psychology for a healthier workplace. Now, Brett has done his master's in positive psychology, so we can't wait to hear a little bit more about that. But before we get into that, I want to introduce you to the GrowthRx community. Brett, I know you quite well as an osteopath and as a colleague, but most other people don't. So we'll start with 3 questions to get to know you. Let me ask you this. So firstly, what would you call your greatest skill right now?
Probably writing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just writing blogs, so just for therapeutic value and for yourself, or just professionally?
Yeah, both. I think therapeutically, a touch of journaling and just getting thoughts down on a page has been really helpful for me throughout the COVID period. And otherwise, I've become a very good finger painter with my eldest little lady. So you should see some of my skills with this.
Awesome. And now, so I guess obviously we are in COVID lockdown and we're all dreaming of bigger and better things. I want to know the first holiday you're going to go on. Where is it going to be once we get out of lockdown?
I'm going right to the top of Hell's Gate at the Noosa National Park. That's where I'm going.
Okay, beautiful. And why that?
It's been a pretty special place the last 10 years. My wife and I have gone there every single year. We've been this is for 10 years. And we've sort of, our family has spent all the time there together. We've got a lot of special memories, and of course, warmth, sunshine, and the beach is where we're our best selves. So that's where we want to go.
Yeah, beautiful. And what about a book that you're reading? What's a book that you believe everybody should read? It can be fiction, non-fiction.
The most recent book I've probably finished is right here, actually. I'll grab it. It's called Triumphs of Experience. And for anyone who doesn't know about the Grant study, which is the longest ever study of adult development, which is still going. And it talks about the key lessons learned out of this incredible study. It's a large book, but something everyone will find meaning in it, depending on who you are. So I highly recommend.
I'll definitely add that one to my list. And my favourite question of all, where do you stand with Crocs? It's very important.
I haven't seen or worn a Croc since I was about 14 years old. And I suggest that there's no way you could adapt a Croc to make it acceptable.
Okay, good answer. I'll add that to my list of many others. Okay, so moving on today, obviously I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience. What drove you? I mean, obviously you started off as an osteopath and a very successful practitioner and business owner, but you went back to study, and in particular that positive psychology, and obviously that's partly got to do with making a difference and helping people, and just that helper's high that I hear you talk about a lot. What drove you back to change your direction, I suppose, or add to your skill set?
A couple of different things. One, like many young practitioners, and young meaning experience, I threw myself into the gauntlet 6 days a week, saw as many patients as I possibly could to gain experience, and find myself each day at the very bottom of my energy well, and eventually found myself becoming less empathetic, and quite cynical about practicing with patients. And that was still my number one passion at the time. And then I just got reading about different, I guess, psychological frameworks and the way in which mindset made a difference, apart from handling your workload, but understanding more around the soft skills, and that they can drain away just as quickly as hard skills can if you don't pay attention to them, and have skills to buffer against the inherent challenges that any practitioner faces in healthcare. So that was number one. And then number two, which I recently wrote about in the Metaphor article, was a family member and grandfather, my mentor, passing away, and reading his memoir prior to him passing away about a story of war survival and a non-Jewish family ultimately hiding them away when all that could happen was a knock on the door by the Nazi regime and they'll be shot in the head dead. And they had no family connection to these boys. And then he came to Australia and found a way to bring up a family, thrive, give to others, be a generous human being. And I couldn't understand. So it was that ended up triggering me to go back to look at, I guess, the science of what made life worth living, which is what positive psychology is.
Yeah. And, you draw on it all the time, and leadership, you share my passion for that. I know you do, but a lot of the foundations and the fundamentals of the soft skills that we deliver in the treatment room comes back to our core values and our mindset. And I love hearing you talk about that. And obviously in the caring for clinician model, mindset is such an important thing that we have to care about, and we have to nurture that, just like our physical self. It sound, to some people, that whole mind, body, spirit thing, but collectively we need to ground ourselves, and we need to make sure that we are at our best before we can make other people better. And I think it's that whole concept of putting on your own oxygen mask first as a leader, because you're worth not much to anybody else if you are just hanging on by a thread. And I know there's many business owners, leaders, and just everyone in general who are just hanging on right now. And our workplaces have taken a definite shift. I think morale is really flat in some clinics, particularly with the announcements coming out in Victoria. I mean, we get our hopes up and then we sort of get deflated again. But we're of a very reactive nature at the moment. And it's really hard to bring your best productivity and efficiency when you're quick to react, because you're in fright and flight mode, as opposed to, I guess what we're generally used to and what that previous normal would be. So extending on today, and I know you've prepared some stuff for us, which is great because everybody loves slides. I know that I do.
To an extent.
It is that tying that positive psychology and the foundations between where your passions lie and helping to create healthier workplaces, particularly just in general, but particularly right now. So I'd love to hear what you've got to share for us.
Let's go. I mean, I think just something on a comment about what you said, that even though it started, my journey started from a positive psychology point of view on individuals. I kept thinking about the I or the you in positive psychology and the constructs that we'll speak about today. And I quickly realized that that's not where my passion is. It's not in I, it's not in you, it's in we, it's in us, it's in organizations. And you'll see today that I'm not going to speak about individuals, even though there's some aspects of individual behavior, how that contributes to larger scale change. So I think that's going to be, I hope, what everyone gets out of today. It's that your individual behaviors, whether you think they're happening, whether you think they're having that impact or not, by doing certain things, you are having an impact on a greater scale, even if you don't see it. So that's what I hope people take out of this as well.
And I'd love it to extend at the end. One of my favourite hot topics at the moment is accountability. and finding chains of accountability, or making people accountable not only for themselves and their self-actions, but the role and the catalyst effect of how their behaviours affect the workplace. And exactly as you said, it's bigger than just us as individuals. You know, we've got that catchphrase at the moment, we're all in this together. I think you can take that back to individual organisations. So, you know, these you're talking off, is it the 6 key principles today?
That's how we'll talk about the 6 principles, and we'll speak about 4 other psychological resources. And I'm gonna show you where the research is currently at. What interests me the most, and I hope others as well, is actually how the theory about how it actually works. So yes, we can care for each other, we can support each other, we can act with integrity, we can show gratitude for the things we're, you know, grateful for. But how does it actually work? And there's one particular principle that I'll talk about that I've just read so much about and am so interested in and see it every single day. And I think hopefully I can give it a name today for people to think about more and go look at and read about.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sickeningly optimistic and I get excited about everything, even if the people watching aren't. So I'll hand over to you.
Done. I'm going to share my screen quickly, and I'll plug this in. Does that look okay?
Yeah, got that. It's great.
I think firstly, at the moment, as Jade mentioned, organisations they're always seeking to increase output, whether that's profitability, whether that's well-being. It's not important whether it's financial or not. It's that most people are seeking to increase output. The growing prevalence of these stresses and anxieties, or in pos psych, they speak about malaises, which as a practitioner, I'm sure most can understand that word, is it maximizing performance can come at a price for a number of different reasons. And positive psychology can offer a wealth of solutions or buffers to that. So I think key questions for today that I want to speak about, what are the mechanisms by which these things actually improve workplace well-being? And then by practicing these behaviors, are you guaranteeing success and significance as a practitioner and as a business? So I hope people get an understanding of what these 2 terms are, which we'll go into separately, and then a couple of practical strategies to take away, and some more notes about other ideas about what to maybe go read more about. So the 2 things we'll speak about are positive organizational scholarship, and then after that, behaviors. And the key difference is the scholarship part represents this mindset and value orientation. And then the behavior is actually the practical individual behaviors that people show or organizations show together that result in positive organizational change. So the scholarship aspect focuses on the 4 things that you see. So strength and talent, they're in positive psychology, they're actually considered different. So strengths are normally considered quite inherent, and it's what you're best at, and it's what you value most. And then talents are normally seen to be quite natural, that you're born with them. And then by investing time and effort in those talents, they become strengths. So that's the key difference. Different organizations and different scholars write about them differently. Vitality is about positive emotion and about energy in the workplace. Resilience being about being able to rebound or bounce back from adversity, but also being able to grow from positive events as well. And then cultivating extraordinary performance, both financially and non-financially. Culture is an interesting one to define. There's no unifying theory on this, and it's really hazy. But if you go through most of the research, there's these 3 things: that the values, beliefs, and assumptions that are held by the group that guide behavior. And I'm more interested in behavior than talk. I'm interested in action And I think that true positive culture shows the practices that we'll speak about in the next couple of slides. It sort of builds on last slide, but they speak about the implications of these positive outcomes, both financially and non-financially. From a language point of view, they speak a lot about strength, capability, and possibility rather than problem, threat, and weakness. One thing I should make clear is positive psychology is not all about positivity. It doesn't discount negativity. It doesn't discount tough love. And in fact, many organizational sort of scholars in pos psych, they speak about tough love being the best love. It's not just about thinking rainbows and unicorn type fluffy stuff. There's also other constructs to it. And then the virtuousness, and so eudaimonism or eudaimonic is talking about well-being with meaning and purpose over a long period of time, rather than hedonism, which is more about simple momentary pleasures. So it's an important sort of differentiating factor. All the organizational stuff speaks about meaning and purpose over a long period of time, not in the moment simple pleasures, even though they matter. They absolutely matter. And a simple pleasure could simply be, not that Victorians can do this right now, but going out for a drink, after Friday night with your friends, for your colleagues at work, rather than that will still guide and improve organizational behavior, but it mostly focuses on these longer term eudaimonism rather than hedonism. So these are the 6 practical behaviors that the scholarship looks at for organizational effectiveness. And there's a stack of research on this, which I'm happy to provide for the resource sort of library of GrowthRx if people wanted the papers as well. They shouldn't surprise anyone. I don't think they'll surprise anyone, but they are well researched now. So caring for the self and others. So it's not just about one or the other, it is both. It's supporting others, it's forgiving, it's inspiring, meaning in the workplace, which is more around the eudaimonism that we spoke about just before, and then respect, integrity, and gratitude. And one of the lines that I love from a really famous paper in this is, truth is the beginning of excellence, which comes back to the tough love is the best love. So it doesn't mean you always have to compromise as a leader and not give tough love and hold people accountable, like Jade, what you were saying just before. That's a part of respecting others, I feel. That's one thing we certainly do at work is, if tough love is required, we're going to give it. We're going to give it in a certain way, and support and show a pathway for improvement and growth, but we're not going to hide from it because the problems will just become bigger. Did you have any questions on any of those 6 behaviours?
I think it's more, but I think I'll wait till the end. But my question's probably more aligned with which are more weighted out of the 6, because I think depending on where you sit and where your roles and responsibilities lie, your weight for effectiveness in being able to contribute to these 6 plays a very, very different role. And when you're talking about I and me as opposed to us and we, where clearly defining where those roles are and where you need to contribute heavily, I think is really important. But you might answer some of that coming up.
Oh, it's a really good question, and it is very context specific, like you've said. And I think from a weighting point of view, most of the research, all of them have shown significant correlation between this and positive change or positive organizational function. But certainly as a foundation, respect, integrity, and gratitude are the 3 things that have continued to show the highest levels, regardless of the industry or the context. And there's been a lot of this done in healthcare, which I think is fantastic. It gives us a leg to stand on when we talk about it. Mostly in Stanford, but Certainly respect and integrity is the foundation, and then the other five, similar to what you discussed about context specific. This is my favorite, and it's quite simple and it'll make sense. How does this stuff actually work? From the research, these are the three ways. By amplifying positive emotional and social emotion and social connection, buffering against negative effects of stress and trauma, and then this one's a touch more vague, unless you know a lot about gardening, which I'll explain in a second. Heliotropism is about developing positive energy that elevates performance. This is the one that got a lot of stick in the media, or anyone who argues against positive psychology in organizations. They said, no, this is too fluffy for us. We're not interested at all. But if you look deeper into it, the heliotropism stuff it's called the heliotropic effect. And the best way I could describe it is when you walk into a very unfamiliar dark room, what is the first thing you go do? That's a question for you, Jade.
Right.
It's a riddle.
Well, you turn the light on. I thought it was obvious.
Turn the light on.
Yeah.
You turn the light on. That's right. So you go to light first. Now, where this principle actually came from was if you put a plant, any sort of plant, next to the sun or in a windowsill next to the sun, after a period of time, you'll come back and it'll arc towards the sunshine. It always moves towards the sun and the light. And this is what it all is. So the assumption is that each living system, humans, plants, animals, it doesn't matter, we have a tendency towards leaning to positivity. That's one of the assumptions. So we want to perform as our best selves, is what it's saying. And by deriving and cultivating positive energy, we immediately give others permission to elevate their performance. That's what that assumption is, and that's what that principle is. And that's the one that I relate most to personally.
But isn't it nice when evidence finally supports what we know to be true? We all gravitate towards positive people with a really bright energy. You know, people, it's human nature. We can't help but do that. You do it at a social function, you do it at a party. If somebody's bland like a pot plant that sits in the corner and you've got to water them every now and again, it doesn't make you want to go and be around them. So it's nice to see that there's a word for that, as you said, and that evidence is finally supporting what we know in human nature to be true.
For sure. And like I said at the start of this, I hope that a lot of this won't surprise people, but it's nice to give it some language. And I think that's one of the key reasons I wanted to produce this information for the team at GrowthRx, is because what we can do is gather a very, very common language, so we can start talking about it using these phrases, these words, and then you can go talk to patients, you can go talk to your colleagues. It's widespread, your families. And by doing that, we promote optimism. Ultimately, that's what we're doing. So moving on to actual behaviors now. So more around the practical application of what we just spoke about. The individual characteristics we're trying to promote with this sort of thing, the four things you see on your screen. So to give it more definition and then some examples of them as well, practically, self-efficacy is simply the belief that you as an individual can perform your daily activities, pretty much. That's at the very basic level. But by giving people competency to achieve their goals, you're driving them way, way beyond negativity and further towards thriving and flourishing. Hope is more a motivational state. It's about goals and an internal locus of control, it's called, but ultimately saying, I can control my outcomes. So if you've got a goal, you feel like you've got the ability to achieve that goal without counting on 100 others, or unfortunately, and I don't agree with some of this, in the evidence, it argues strongly against some of the religious beliefs, because there are people that go out there counting on God, for example, to get them to their goal, which is more the external locus. I think it's a slightly an unfair argument personally, and I'm not a religious person, but that's just something that's interesting for me. But it comes up as saying, yes, I can control my outcomes ultimately, which is a really important thing, especially right now for any Victorians that we're speaking to. Optimism is simply expecting good outcomes, expecting positive outcomes, and not being in a frame of mind that says, this is going to happen, this is awful, this is bad, this is, it's just that pessimistic tone of voice, whether that's internally or to others. And then the resiliency aspect is that capacity to bounce back and rebound from adverse events. So to give a couple of examples, I think I'll speak to hope first. If you were to go sit down with one of your colleagues and talk to them about setting challenging stretch goals, a realistic pathway to achieve those goals, and then having open conversation about, I call it re-goaling, but re-goaling to avoid false hope. So you put a goal way too far out there for them in that moment, then it's just too hard for them to achieve. You should be promoting achievement and accomplishment. So that's from hope point of view. Optimism is about understanding, speaking to your colleagues around whatever self-defeating language they're doing internally. And you can't know that unless you're having one-on-one sort of deep and meaningful conversations with these people, which I think is an essential part of what we do as leaders. And then with those self-defeating beliefs, the next part is bringing it back to reality and showing them, is this really what is happening, or is it what's going on, the narrative within your own mind? What's the gap between those two, and how can we close them up? And I think that's a really important skill as a leader, to take someone and say, I appreciate and understand why you're feeling that way, but what's real, and how can we close the gap between those two things? From a resiliency point of view, my only key tip with this sort of stuff is support networks and being okay to reach out and talk. It's if you can't do that, then it's going to be much harder to bounce back. Not that you can't do it as an individual, but I promise you, all of you all have someone who you can reach out to and talk to. Yeah. So there's some examples of those 4 resources that are listed on the page.
Busy writing notes here. I've got lots of questions to ask you at the end.
We're not that far from finishing up. So how can we do it? We spoke about a few of them, but speaking up, so empowering your team and encouraging them to express their opinions. I'm not sure if many people have read Ray Dalio's book. He's the founder of Bridgewater, one of the most successful businesses of all time. He wrote a book called Principles, and he talks about, if you don't have a culture in your workplace to speak up and have really difficult, thoughtful disagreement, then you need to change something now. Because if people aren't talking up and they're going behind, and there's sort of really negative talk behind the scenes when you're not there, it doesn't promote an exceptionally healthy workplace. So really encourage expression and take their suggestions on, and where they think the organisation might be better off. We keep talking about optimism, especially during times that we're having at the moment. And then the bottom one is about developing recruitment and appraisal once you've got them. So hire right, the penalties for hiring wrong are huge. And I find it interesting, I'm not sure about you, Jade, but a lot of people, including all of the businesses I know within allied health, they put a lot of time into hiring right. What I find interesting is once it's done, there's not a lot of appraisal after that. And I don't mean you have to have very, very harsh KPIs or anything like that, but there's no consistent follow-up in a formal setting to say, are we still right? You know, sometimes the context of the business changes and then someone might not be right for the place anymore. So I think that's important to continue to think about. Last thing, where does the research sit? So ultimately, where it's at right now, and this is as recent as I probably had this from April this year, so it's pretty recent. Ultimately, promoting the 6 practices that we spoke about at the start. So respectful treatment, integrity development, gratitude, that results in more frequent and intense positive emotion. Here it says positive affect, but it's positive emotion. That leads to more satisfaction and well-being. So that has been confirmed in the research across huge amounts of data, huge amounts of different industry, a massive cohort of individual people. Satisfaction and well-being in the workplace leads to more individual behaviours that we spoke about, those positive behaviours. That leads to better retention and engagement in the workplace. That has been confirmed, that well-being and satisfaction equals more positive individual behaviour, better retention and engagement in the workplace. And then at the moment, you can see in there that it's not yet confirmed. There's not enough evidence to say that more positive individual behaviour results in profitability. What we do know is workplace engagement results in better profitability and productivity, but we can't say for sure that the 6 behaviours result in better profitability. So I can make plenty of cases that if someone wants to ask me about dollars and cents only, I can talk to you about profit and I can talk to you about different financials in regards to, so if I act with respect and integrity now, does that mean that I'll definitely have a higher bottom line and better profit margin? We don't know. We can assume so, and you might have, and when I say you, I'm talking about anyone that's watching, you might have your own examples of this in your own workplace. When you've got to feel that we're going really well at the moment, the culture's good, everyone's on board, we're feeling good in the workplace, that your bottom line's better. I can argue that 100 times over, but we don't know for sure. We don't know for sure. Summarizing, there's your 6 positive practices. They're evidence-based. They've been shown to improve engagement in the workplace. How does it work? Amplify, buffer, and develop positive energy. Build hope, optimism, resiliency, and make people feel like they can achieve their goals every day. Open the floor.
Great. All right. I'm just going to stop sharing your screen there for a second. There's so much in that, and there's so many hot topics going on at the moment. I'm going to open a few cans of worms. That's not to throw you under the bus, because I genuinely appreciate your perspective, particularly when you're studying this sort of stuff and we're trying to tie the evidence into what we're actually seeing in an organisation. I know for myself, I pride myself on trying to create a positive, healthy culture. But the first thing is, it's something that, as you would attest to, you need to nurture it and you need to invest in it all the time. Even when you've got a healthy culture 1 minute, just one new personality coming in can totally change that. So my first question to you in a roundabout way is that, yes, we're dealing with these 6 topics and we're looking at hope and optimism and all these virtues that we bring in individually, and we all have our role to play. But ultimately, and this is the difficulty with leadership, you're dealing with so many different personalities from so many different cultural backgrounds, environmental factors, parenting backgrounds, all coming together and expecting these pieces of the puzzle to work. So this is where I like to challenge evidence, because I love that evidence has got a blanket rule and says, hey, you create all of these great things, but ultimately you've got to execute it. And execution takes hard work. And for me, it comes back to knowing every single individual that works in your workplace. Because if you want to manage people, you need to know their own skills, their own strengths, their own weaknesses, where their hopes, fears, and where their vision is for the future, so that you can engage them, you can motivate them. How do you, and we can talk about allied health in a second, and this is why big companies spend so much money on this sort of stuff, because there is no blanket rule. Or is there? How do big businesses, when you start growing as an organisation, how do you bring that individual factor in to make sure that you're aligning with the evidence and getting this positive organisation?
It's such a good question. And that's where my skepticism, I'll read anything with a really sort of skeptic eye because of the aspect of practicality and real. You can study as many condition-specific environments as you want, because bottom line is that you choose, as researchers, you choose environments to undertake this research in. I want to add to something that you said, which was you as a leader need to know each individual's strengths, weaknesses, beliefs, values. I argue that every single person needs to know every single person's, depending on the size of the organization. So in larger, once you're scaled up and it can't happen, you've still got small teams normally. There's still units within the bigger picture. And I think that is absolutely essential for everyone to understand everybody. So not just the leader. I think that's the first thing. How do you know that? There are so many different ways to do it. I certainly, I promote is the word. I promote any real evidence-based tool where you can understand people's strengths, weaknesses, values, and document them so you've got them. And then you can always say, so if someone comes to you with an issue, you can go away and you say, okay, I understand it from that perspective because that's your value, that's your belief, that's your upbringing, that's your cultural diversity brought to the table. And then you work off that, which is why PosPsych, on an individual level, they speak about its specific fit, it's called, or what's it called? Intervention specific fit. And then in a group context, it's looking at job specific fit. So it's saying not every single behavior, not every single application of positive psychology will work in every single context. It's not going to happen. There's no way. One thing I'm proud of actually with PosPsych scholars is they do publish and report on findings that don't support their hypothesis. So they actually come out and say, we did this, it worked in that context. We did that, it didn't work in that context. So it's probably best you use it if you're in this frame, but not that. And I respect that a lot. I think that's really important.
And it's sharing the learnings from failure, I guess. They're the ones that preach that. So I guess that's why they're delivering it themselves. And I'm really excited, which I've got to show you. I've got some tools coming out for leadership development, individual organizational growth that looks at these things, plots it down, measures it so that it can be reflected on. Because if you're not, which is one of the things that you were saying before, if you can't measure it, you can't track it. And if you can't track it, you can't reflect on it to know that you're actually creating a meaningful change, whether you should keep some things or whether you should ditch some others. And I think this is one of the things that we have, which without going down a whole different path, one of the reasons why it's really hard to track performance as allied health professionals outside of patient outcomes is we can't legally set KPIs when practitioners are contractors. And again, this is where my passion lies and why I genuinely believe that my business and Western Region Health has grown exponentially over the last decade is because we shifted from a contractor model to an employee model, which now I teach diligently, not because I'm biased towards any model, but because I see the benefits of what it delivers when you can make decisions, but also reflect on things that you can help employees for growth and reflection. Because if you're not doing that, you're not doing anything.
No, I think there's been the stink that has been kicked up over the past 3 to 5 years, not just around the sham contracting stuff, but also about KPIs in general. Our point of view in our business is if you don't attach meaning to those KPIs for the people that you're speaking to, they're worthless. There's no point. We hold very specific values that we attach towards KPIs that we measure and give to our team and we talk with them, we don't talk at them. They know what they all mean. So we're not talking about you were booked this often. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about communication standards. We're talking about your connection to your people, and whether we see trends and slides down or up. And so I totally agree. And that falls back to your comment at the start around accountability. I think people are just too scared. That's one of my things. They just don't want to. And I was one of these people. I was terrified of being held accountable for negative outcomes.
Yeah.
And that's how you get better. It's that simple.
And it's not a matter of bill more, book more, see more. It's actually not about the money side of it. I mean, no one has a job if you're not seeing patients. We work with a fee-for-service model. That's a no-brainer. And you also don't need to push people to see patients just for the sake of it. But we all have that same common ground, and that is to help people and provide high-value care. KPIs and everything aside, the patient is our KPI. If a patient's not coming back, as I always say in my courses, it's like swiping left on Tinder. It's because they've gone down and found somebody else. I mean, they are your biggest KPI. Is a patient coming back? Are they engaging? Are they buying into your treatment plan? Or are they going to find somebody else who's doing a better job? And in this day and age, in this fast-paced, disposable world that we live in, people deserve to come back to an 8 or a 9 or a 10 out of 10. Why would anybody keep coming back and keep rebooking when somebody, in regards to performance and delivery and outcomes, is a 4 or 5 out of 10? When Johnny down the road is an 8 out of 10. It's going to work itself out in the wash.
For sure. And I think right now, and I don't want to keep speaking about COVID and Victorians right now, because I know that we've got people outside of Victoria. But right now, from our point of view, for Victorian allied health businesses, and this is for anyone, there's 2 very basic questions that you should ask yourself right now. What do you do best, and who do you do it for? That's it. And it's getting back to basics every single time. And that's working with integrity, your values. I don't know any allied health practitioner who doesn't love to give to patients if they're treating patients. And if they're a non-treating practitioner or business owner, then I don't know any of them who doesn't love giving back to their colleagues. I know no one. I don't know anyone who is not generous in our field. It's just about being able to navigate the circumstances of your own context, drawing on the things that we've spoken about today, what Lance spoke about, what Tristan speaks about, what Kevin speaks about from a business perspective, what you speak about from a leadership perspective, and everyone else who has something meaningful to say. It's about bringing it together for your specific context to get the best possible outcome for your team.
Yeah.
But
I couldn't agree with you more. So I think, extending on that accountability, because it is one of my favourite topics. And I think for me, my whole life, and it comes down to how you're brought up and the behaviours that you've watched and the role models that you've had in your life. From the second I could work at age 14, I worked. And I remember my mum picking me up from my first Baker's Delight shift and said, "You owe me $35 for that Billabong t-shirt now that you're working." It's not always about hustle and grind, but I just knew that sometimes you've kind of got to do the work to get the lifestyle that you want. And there's been a little bit of controversy around this and around some of the opinions based upon this, and particularly even my own. I'm not about work yourself to the bone, go burnout and all the rest of it. But there's a lot of this mindset that I have when it comes to work-life balance, which I think is a struggle in itself, because it's really difficult to define. And the reason why it's difficult to define is because balance is different for everybody. What might be balance to me is being able to work until 12 o'clock at night, because that's where my creative mind and that's where I write better. It might be for somebody else having the morning off so that they can go surfing because they want to work late into the evening. It might be somebody else trying to get home by 3 o'clock to their kids. We all want things, but at the end of the day, there's also life, there's also earning an income, and there's also being able to have a choice when that applies in life. And often what I'm starting to find, and this is what I'd love your opinion on, somehow work-life balance has been attached to success and happiness.
Mm.
And therefore, if I don't have balance in my life because I'm not finishing at 5 o'clock and I have to finish at 8 o'clock and work every second weekend, I somehow don't have balance. Therefore, I'm not happy and therefore I'm not leading towards success. Therefore, I'm angry at my boss because my boss is making me work Saturdays.
Yeah.
So again, I'm biased towards this because I am a boss, but I was also a very, very passionate associate and employee one day. And I worked whenever my patients determined. It had nothing to do with my boss. And if I wanted to create a different lifestyle for myself, I wanted to be in demand. And that meant if I had patient numbers enough, then I could determine when my hours were. Where do you sit with this? I mean, as organisations, is my head in the sand? Should I just be letting my entire team work from 8 till 2 because no one wants to work past 5 o'clock? I mean, where is the balance there in the compromise?
Firstly, I don't like the term work-life balance. I think anyone who writes about it, I just think it's a bit cliche. I'm more interested in the term work-life integration, because again, like I said before, I don't know any allied health practitioner who is still practicing who hates it, who actually doesn't enjoy treating patient. Maybe not 50, 60, 70 patients a week, whatever you do, maybe just 20, doesn't matter. I don't know anyone who hates it. And what that means is if you can integrate them together, I can't separate work life. Like work is life for me. Life is work. And again, it's a language shift. Some people might say, oh, it's just semantics. No, it's not, because the internal language and therefore your mindset towards it is different. So should everyone work 8 till 2? Not if you want to lead the life that perhaps you would like to. This is depending on each individual, of course. And this is where some people will say, but positive psychology is all fluffy. It's airy-fairy. They're studying positive psychology with profit outcomes. Money is only a dirty word if you make it one. The intentionality around money is more important to me than just the dollar sign. The dollar sign is nothing without value attached to it and intention and outcomes. So what I would say is don't bury your head in the sand, because I'm a strong believer in a like a qualification period, ultimately, that early on in a allied health career, people need to come and see you. They need to see how good you actually are before you can make demands. It's really important. I went through it too. I got to a point where I thought, King Brett, you know, I'm here. I can make demands. I can change that. I can do this. I can do whatever I want, and I'd still earn X and do this because of it. No, that's not how things work. It's just not. So there's always this gap. And spoke about it with optimism, about saying the negative self-talk is saying, what's your belief? What's your behavior? What's the outcome that you actually want? How big is the gap between it? And what can we actually do practically to close the gap? So it comes back to, if you don't know what your people want out of this, if you actually don't know what they want from work, then how can you create an environment and a culture to facilitate that? It's just, there's no possible way.
And when you were saying hiring, right, these are the sorts of questions that you can ask during that interview process. If you know that within 12 months' time, somebody, you know, doesn't want to be working Saturdays and, you know, it's just, well, I'm not going to work past 5 o'clock, you can get that out in the interview process. But I think, you know, and I'm talking collectively with our team know that we've got patients that finish at 6 o'clock. And so our clinic hours are from 8 till 8. That's because, not because I'm being a nasty dictator and expecting them to work just because. It's because that's when the patient demand is there. We've got patients desperate to get an appointment when they finish work because they themselves work 9 till 6. They've got to get on the train, get back home and get to an appointment before the clinic closes. This is why we extend it, not to be horrible and take away work-life balance. It's because of consumer need. And that happens in any industry. Hospitality, I mean, chefs, I'm sure they don't like working and cooking dinner for people, but it's not like you can expect your consumer to eat dinner at 4 o'clock because you want to be home by 8.
Exactly.
So I think, I guess some of that, but then eventually one thing I do know, to put a positive spin on it, is that most people who are in the industry for a while, who do get a great patient base, who do have patients that are loyal and follow them, patients start working around you.
Yeah.
And you do get a beautiful life, and you do get to cut down to 3 days a week or work in school hours and drop Saturdays. It does happen. It certainly happens. So I do want to encourage and motivate these new graduates out there that we do have great lives, but we certainly had to put in the work at the beginning. And, I think unfortunately there needs to be a little bit of those hard truths, whether we like it or not. It just is the way it is, because unless unless you've got a patient base, you don't have a job.
Correct. And like I said, truth is the beginning of excellence. That's
Yeah.
what it is.
And I think also one of the things that we're touching on, because you talk about optimism a lot, and I'm a really optimistic person without verging on naivety that everything is just going to work out okay. I'm certainly not a pessimist where my default is this is going to work out badly. And this is where I kind of came up with that gratitudeous mindset, is that often we can't be an optimist or a pessimist, but we can be grateful for what we have in the moment. But it's also about pragmatism. There's a difference between what could be done and then what can be done. And I think that's the crux of what happens in an organisation. You've kind of got to pick your battles sometimes too. And that also depends on how you deal with individual personalities. And one thing that I was really bad at was painting rainbows and unicorns and expecting people to share my vision and my passion for where the business is going. Yeah. To some people, it's a vision and it's a passion, it's a life source for me. But to others, it's a job. And that's also okay too. They can still love their job, but they don't have to eat, sleep, and breathe it. So I think that pragmatism comes in place there. And this is where it comes down to assumptions and expectations. You can't expect or assume people to have a passion for things that you do. You've got to allow people to have their own journey and make up their own rules. So how do you teach optimism or mirror it or as a behaviour when you simply can't, particularly in times like now? Is it about being pragmatic and realistic in these times, and optimism will come from that? How would you teach it?
Well, it's a great question. I'm firstly a really big believer in language. I think it's the most powerful tool we all have. If we're talking about leaders at a time like now, then your team will only be as optimistic or pessimistic as you are. Generally the risk the risk right now is greater for the owner of the business and the leaders of the business than people who have either just currently been employed or their recent associates or whatever it might be. The risk often lies with the leader and the owner or owners. If you can provide a platform that you're using positive language and that look, we have a team that cares a lot about each other. So when someone comes to me and says, wow, you must be stressed out of your mind right now. Look at this, look what's happening with that. Look at this announcement. It doesn't get you anywhere. And if there's one thing I've learned since being in this role is no one cares about whinging. No one wants to hear you whinge. Whinging doesn't get you anywhere. There's no point. So stop it. And what's important
True.
True.
Start of excellence.
No one cares. I was a whinger. I whinged a lot. Probably when I first came into the job, I was like a 2.5-year-old having meltdowns, but it doesn't get you anywhere, and it doesn't take you to a good place within yourself or on a bigger scale. So teaching it, language first. If you can talk it, if you can write it, and then if you behave how you speak, then others will follow. You are giving them, it's actually a line out of a movie called Coach Carter, but there's a line that says, by doing that, by being optimistic and kind and acting with respect and integrity, you unconsciously give others the permission to do the same. And I believe that every moment. Language first and then follow it with behavior. That's how I'd teach it.
which is true integrity. And, you know, kindness is just as contagious as COVID.
Yeah.
So, yeah, look.
One for every two and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I just love it. And I love that positive. And I think you're right. I think people do think that positive psychology is all fluffy and rainbows, but it's the study of what creates positivity. And you can only get that by addressing negativity, really, because you have to learn from what doesn't work to get to what does. Sure. So look, it's a fascinating concept that I love, and I know that you love too, and it ties so strongly into leadership, because ultimately you want to be remembered for being an authentic, genuine leader who creates a positive, meaningful change. There's certainly some bad leaders out there, and we're being hit in the face like a truck with a lot of bad leadership at the moment all over the globe. And many of them I wouldn't, sympathize, I empathize with, because I don't think anyone wants to be making those hard decisions right now. But a lot of it does come down to emotional intelligence. And so my last question to you is, leaders, and I ask this often, and I'm interested to hear on your perspective, leaders are born and made, but do you believe that the environment and your upbringing, in some respect, in regards to your environmental factors, can make some people born leaders because they're born into a certain environment?
Confirm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there's no doubt. I have nothing to complain about. I come from a family that has leaders coming out of our ears, and not by position. I don't mean it by position and status. I mean it by every single day behaviours, self-worth, self-esteem, belief in yourself, because I know I've had moments throughout this COVID period making decisions where I've been very unsure of myself, probably for the first time ever under this position. But I have no doubt that your statement is correct, and that therefore by surrounding yourself with the right people, or aligning yourself with a mentor or multiple mentors that you trust, that you see positivity within, that you can only get better. So yeah, I completely agree with your statement.
Yeah. Now, I'm really excited to let people know we did post up one blog, but there's a couple more blogs from you coming. So if you're loving Brett's work, there is a lot more coming out, and we are privileged enough to get a little bit more of your writing over the coming weeks, particularly on leadership. But your Caring for the Clinician module and program is available through Osteopathy Australia for members, but also non-members can get access to that. And part of the great thing of that, you're looking to work with the Allied Health Consortium, and obviously lots of big things coming. But if you are interested, then I'm sure that we can put people in contact with you to hear more about your work and all those sorts of things. Brett is also a GrowthRx leader. He's on our website. All his links are on our website, and all his blogs are up there. So I encourage you definitely to read a lot of his work. It's very grounded, it's very passionate, but it's also very real. And it's also certainly not fluffy and rainbow and unicorns. I think it is quite a pragmatic approach, and it is keeping things real, but for a positive outcome. And I think that your work does speak for itself. So thank you very much for talking to us today. Thanks for taking the time to put together that presentation. I know a lot of people come back to these talks often, and I think this is one of great importance when you do have times where you're a little bit flat or you're lacking in direction and you need a little bit of motivation, whether it be what you can contribute to your own team as an associate, as an employee, as a contractor, or as a business owner. I think everybody can draw off this information and look a little bit more at that we and us, and step away from that I and me. So thank you very, very much.
No worries, guys. Cheers.
Thanks. See you, everyone. Bye.